Jeff Mason, the White House correspondent for Reuters and president of the White House Correspondents Association, is in Washington, and he joins me now. Jeff, good to see you.
Good to see you, Vlad.
I want to ask you about something that has been on a lot of people's minds in the last 24 hours. The president-elect has postponed a press conference originally scheduled for today to address his business holdings. It's been over a month since Trump won the election and more than 4 months since his last press conference. What does it mean when the president doesn't answer questions, not simply from us, the press, because these are questions that the American people have?
For sure. Well, it's certainly a concern to journalists and to the White House Correspondents Association when the president-elect does not hold press conferences, and we are eager for those to start. It has been a while. That's certainly true. And to answer your question about what does it mean, look, the president-elect is putting together his cabinet. He's making choices that will affect policy under a Trump administration, and it is the role of the press on behalf of the American public to ask questions about that and to get answers about what they mean. So we certainly encourage him to have a press conference and hope that that is a tradition that he will also continue at the White House.
Do you expect this attitude to continue when he enters the White House, especially after Donald Trump's chief of staff, Reince Priebus, said major changes, and didn't specify what, could be in store for White House press briefings under the incoming administration? He also added that the assigned seatings at the press briefings began under President Barack Obama. You are the president of the White House Correspondents Association. Give us a sense of the history behind the seating and why that's not true.
Well, it's not true. Mr. Priebus was mistaken when he said that it was the Obama White House that started assigning seats. In fact, seats have been assigned in the White House press briefing room since 1981 when they were installed. So that is a long-standing tradition. And in fact, the White House Correspondents Association assumed the responsibility for assigning those seats on the request of Republican and Democratic administrations who were sensitive to the possibility of looking like they were favoring others if they made the assignments themselves. So that's just the history. In terms of broader changes at the White House with regard to the press, you know, at this point it's hard to say. I think we're kind of waiting to see what happens when President-elect Trump comes to the White House, but we are certainly going to continue pushing for access in the same way we have under this president, President Obama, and in the same way that we have for decades.
His surrogates and people on the Trump transition team have said that these changes could be good changes. Will the White House Correspondents Press Association respond when we learn of those changes?
Sure. I mean, if they come out and announce what changes they have in mind, we probably will respond. But at this point, it's kind of a guessing game, and we're waiting to see what they have in mind.
All right, let's move on. 6 groups have gathered more than 400,000 signatures from people concerned about President-elect Trump's conflicts of interest. Some petitions demand Mr. Trump sell his assets to a blind trust, while others are calling for a congressional investigation. The president-elect took to Twitter today, as he does almost every day, brushing off his business entanglements, saying, "The media tries so hard to make my move to the White House as it pertains to my business so complex, when actually it isn't." What does the president-elect have to do to avoid these conflicts?
Well, I can't really advise on what he has to do to avoid the conflicts. I can say, however, that it's the media's job to report on them if they exist, and to report robustly on his administration going forward and the ties that he has with companies and countries that he may be involved in diplomatically as president of the United States.
I mean, does it strike you? I mean, there are issues here when the president's children sits in on a policy meeting or they sit in on a meeting with a foreign leader and they are also running their businesses.
Well, that definitely raised eyebrows, and I think that's a concern to some lawmakers who are watching and others who have raised questions about it. And that's one reason why it's important for reporters to be able to report on that, which we have. And I think that'll be an interesting decision that he has to make going forward. And you know, I think it'll be watched very closely by the American public, by the press, and by lawmakers who are working with the president-elect.
All right, whether or not the president-elect agrees, there's definitely a perception problem, according to our CBS poll. Take a look at these numbers. 59% say Trump's business relationships will create a conflict of interest, and 70% say it will still be a conflict of interest if a family member is in charge of the business. How problematic can this get? And even with the reporting that is done, will that change the president's mindset when it comes to this?
Well, it's hard to say what will change the president-elect's mindset, but it is problematic insofar as there are people calling for the Government Accountability Office to look into his conflicts of interest. Elizabeth Warren, the Democratic senator from Massachusetts, is one of them. And so that alone will keep that sort of thread in the headlines. And for that reason, I suspect that the Trump transition team and perhaps the future Trump administration will have to answer that, or will, in any case, have an issue there that others are asking about.
All right, let me ask you one last thing. In addition to these conflicts of interest, Donald Trump also has a Russia problem, according to some. There's a growing concern with Rex Tillerson's ties to Russia as we learn more about Russia's involvement in interfering with our election. Well, again, today, the president-elect on Twitter wrote this: if Russia or some other entity was hacking, why did the White House wait so long to act? Why did they only complain after Hillary lost? I guess, Jeff, does Mr. Trump have a point here? I want your take on this. On one hand, there's certainly a lot of people that are saying, look, if the Obama administration had even more details than they were willing to let on, and they didn't because they didn't want to seem to be in the tank for Hillary Clinton, that's one thing. But the president-elect himself encouraged Russia to hack, to do some hacking.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big story in the fall. I guess the important thing that I would point out here is it wasn't just after the election that this issue was talked about. The intelligence community came out in October, early October, and said that Russia had been involved in hacking Democratic organizations. So it is not a new development after Hillary Clinton's loss that the White House has commented on it, or that the government generally has commented on it. In fact, intelligence agencies had already made that determination as the election was taking place.
All right, serious questions. Jeff Mason, we thank you as always. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.